MBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, we'll make a little bit of podcast history here with our first ever Mailbag show. Yes, that's right. Podcast history, a Mailbag show. My admissions colleague, Katherine Alford, who's been a frequent guest here on the ExecMBA podcast, we recently sat down to answer some of the questions that we frequently receive from prospective students around this time of year. So we take on everything from, is it still a good time to apply, to the structure and design of our Executive MBA program and beyond. So if you've got a question, you've come to the right place. Chances are we answer it here in this podcast. But of course, if we don't, you're always welcome to email us at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. So without further ado, here is our first ever Mailbag show with my admissions colleague, Katherine Alford. Katherine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so here we are. We're sitting in Charlottesville, Darden Media Studios, not in our typical haunts of Sands Family Grounds in the Washington, D.C. metro. We're down here on the main grounds of the Darden School today, and I thought it'd be a good time for us to catch up about where we are in the Executive MBA cycle. So a little bit of a mailbag segment here, new territory for the podcast. Not exactly. We always talk about admissions tips, admissions updates, but this is a good time of year to check in. So number one question that I've been getting from people lately is it too late to apply? Is this a question that you've been getting as well?
Yes, Brett. And the answer is that it is not too late to apply. We actually have 10 application deadlines throughout the year, and we have just completed our 5th deadline. So we have 5 more deadlines, 5 more opportunities to apply.
That's correct. So the February 10 deadline just passed, but we have March 10, April 10, May 10, June 10, and June 25th. So we're going to go into the class fills. If the past couple of years are any guide, expect to use those May and June deadlines. So if you're thinking about applying to our program now, if you're investigating whether an Executive MBA makes sense for you in the coming year, there's still plenty of time to do your research, to apply. This is a great time to be thinking about all these things. And we actually just wrote a blog post about this not so long ago. Is an Executive MBA right for you? Some of the things to think through, as well as some ways to investigate this question and sort of engage with this question. What's your number one tip, Katherine, when people say, hey, look, I'm trying to figure out if this is the right step for me? What do you typically tell people?
Right. So are you asking if it's the right step for me in terms of an MBA in general or which MBA program?
Let's start with an MBA in general.
Okay. So I asked them about their career goals and where they see themselves in the future, what opportunities they're looking for, and what skills they feel they need to get there.
Yeah, so an MBA is certainly something that will help broaden your skill set. It will certainly give you exposure to things that you may not have learned about previously. And we hear from students all the time about this. One of the things that's been interesting to me as we've been doing some of these video interviews, getting ready for a media project we're working on, is that many of our students came to the program with a focus on technical skills. I need to know more about accounting, finance. And what they ultimately got out of the program was that, and then much more, right? The leadership development piece, the opportunity to learn with a different group of people or around a different group of people than the people they typically work with, learn about new industries, new kinds of problems, think about new kinds of problems. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree, Brett. And I also feel like one of the things people are surprised to learn more about is themselves. They don't realize how much self-reflection they'll be doing as part of this program and thinking about their relationship with their work and what they are looking for in their work and how their work is a good fit with who they are as individuals and who they know themselves to be and who they want to become.
The self-awareness piece is huge. I think you begin with those questions here at Darden pretty early. We've talked on the podcast about the professional advancement course. This is a course led by Connie Dunlop. We had a women's event at Sands Family Grounds not so long ago, and I think this course was mentioned repeatedly throughout the panel discussion with the current students and alumni, just about the impact of that course, the questions that students ask themselves during those classroom conversations about who am I, what's my brand, where am I going, just the impact of that space.
Right, right. And I also remember one student talking about how she had always pictured herself becoming an entrepreneur in the future, but being in this program, having all of the support of the Darden resources and her Darden classmates, she decided, why wait for the future when all of this is available to me now? And so she is now pursuing her startup up full time, which is really exciting to see that through the program she gained the confidence as well as the resources to move forward with her goal.
And we hear that quite a bit from people who have that entrepreneurial passion. I think oftentimes when you talk about people who are looking to start a venture, launch a venture, if they don't have the formal business training, they haven't done anything like an MBA, they may feel that they have a good idea that they'd like to pursue, but ultimately maybe lacking in some of the skills or just the basic competence to step out there and say, I know I can do this. This is the argument I always think for the case method here, because in class, with the safety net of an educational environment, you're able to repeatedly put yourself in the position of a senior leader, owning a problem, thinking about an opportunity, just as you would if you were running your own business.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So we started with the question of, is an MBA right for me? And sort of thinking about some of the professional goals, some of the skill development, some of the sort of motivational learning pedagogical reasons why someone might come to a program. There's also the career component. One of the misconceptions I think about executive MBA students, and obviously this is going to vary from program to program, great conversation to have with any admissions person, is, who are the students in your program and what do their career aspirations look like? I think it's well documented here on the podcast that we have a fair number of career switchers in our program. The majority of our students are actually career switchers. That may be surprising to some of our new listeners. And to be clear, when we're talking about a career switcher, we are talking about someone who is in a job. Obviously, it's a working professional program. You're going to continue to work while you're in school here, but in a job and ultimately wants to make some kind of change, either new employer, new industry. So it could be a relatively small switch. It could be a really big switch, but someone who wants to change jobs out of their existing organization. So Katherine, you work closely with this population as well. You have these conversations all the time. Do you think people are surprised by that information?
Yes, I feel like there is this impression that if you're doing an executive MBA program, you're, one, being sponsored by your company financially, and two, your goal is only to advance in the ranks within that organization. And while sometimes that is the case, most of the time it is not. And so the flexibility that you have in this program to pivot and take ownership over your career is surprising to many in the beginning.
Yeah. And, to be clear, we are seeking to work individually with students, to understand your interests, your aspirations, your goals, what you hope to accomplish here, and develop really a personal career plan for you. So that work actually begins before you even matriculate here. You will meet with a career advisor, or typically around the time of your career of your matriculation at Darden, you will meet with a career advisor for a career kickoff meeting. Also have exciting new program coming for our executive MBA students called CDY that also engages you with some of these questions. So there's a lot of engagement early on. We talked about the professional advancement course, and obviously that support continues. This past weekend in Roslyn, exciting news. There was a Resumania, which is one of the ongoing sort of career-related programming offerings that our career colleagues do. And there was also a meeting of a consulting club. So an executive MBA consulting club, 30, 35 plus students in a room together, all have a common career interest. And both of those things are really exciting to me. I think obviously Resumania is not new, but it's a great way sort of highlighting the sort of resources that are available to executive MBA students, and then just to see that networking happening.
Right. And with the consulting club, some of the students were convinced and determined to do consulting recruiting, and others were just trying to explore the industry. There is definitely a component of the program that is exploration and kind of trying to think about opportunities that you may have that you hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, and obviously on the admissions application, for those of you who've taken a look at some of our short answer questions, you will see that we ask you about your career goals. But we also understand you're going to get into this program. You're going to start having some of these conversations with our career colleagues. You're going to do the professional advancement course. You're going to all of a sudden be surrounded by a group of people who have different backgrounds than your own, do different things than perhaps you even know about. So there's just a natural exploration that comes with this. And so expect that your career interests may evolve over the time in the program. So we talked about sort of the intellectual or academic motivations. We talked about the career motivations. As part of the career, obviously, there's a network of people that you get To me, Katherine, one of the things that I think is a differentiator for Darden is the sort of culture and sense of community. We had an admitted students dinner last night, and one of the questions that came up at that admitted students dinner is one that we get a lot from prospective students. If you've looked at our tuition and fees, you've likely noticed that we include lodging. And, a good chunk of our class comes from the Washington, D.C. metro area. So they are local. And yet, we charge for lodging, because these are designed to be residential weekends. What do you say to students who ask about that question?
Well, I think it's an important indicator of how the school feels about community and creating opportunities to develop community. So by requiring students to stay in the hotel, we are encouraging students to be walking from one building to the other with one another. We're encouraging students to have meals together, to spend time together, to have these offhand conversations that are unplanned and more organic in nature. And we think that networking is an important piece of the program. And one thing that's been interesting to me is to see that students who literally have their own homes a block from our building are still choosing to forego their own beds to stay in the hotel. They feel like when they are in school, they want to focus on being in school, and going home kind of takes them out of the academic zone, distracts them with other things going on in their lives. And so for one weekend a month, it's nice to not have to be home and to have this hotel that's already paid for, where you can solely focus on your academics and networking.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's your choice whether you use the hotel room or not. You're not required to use the hotel. It is included as a cost for everyone, a fee for everyone. But at the same time, you're not required to use it. We're not out there doing bed checks. But what students will tell you is exactly what Katherine said. It's so much easier to get to know your classmates, to spend time with them. When you carve out that time and you're just present for what's happening in the weekends. If you've listened to the podcast for a while and you've heard our student interviews about how they manage time, you will hear a lot of discussion about presence. When you're with your family, you are focused on being with your family. When you are at work, you're focused on being at work. And when you're doing school, you're focused on doing school. This allows you to be efficient in every phase of your life and to also sort of maximize these experiences. And sort of a subtle thing, and this may not always be apparent. There's also a logistical ease that comes with being in this program. So if you're traveling, and you're thinking about coming into the Washington, D.C. metro, if you are traveling in, say on Friday mornings, we start, Fridays at noon for the once a month weekend residencies, you don't have to worry about finding a hotel. Or sort of making those arrangements for yourself. They are already made. The program team, secures hotel rooms for Friday and Saturday night of the once a month weekend residencies. Obviously, for global residencies, leadership residencies, lodging is also provided. So for the in-person components, I think there's an ease that comes with this. And to Katherine's earlier point about sort of, the other people in your life. We've talked with students who have tried to both be at home and be at school during those weekend residencies and juggle those things. And I think oftentimes they feel a little bit caught, Katherine, in feeling like they're not doing a great job at either activity, right? When they're at home, they're trying to do school work and get ready for the next day of the residency. And when they're at the residency, they feel kind of pulled away from their classmates because they realize they need to get home and help. So that can create some stress for people.
Right. I think there's definitely a little bit of a tension over the weekends between family and school, and it takes them a few residencies to figure it out. But it is interesting to see that by the end of the program, most students are choosing to stay in the hotel.
Yeah. And that actually may even register very early on with people. I'm thinking about our first weekend residency with our 2021s, where we had people on Friday night at the first Friday night social saying, you know what? I didn't really think about this too deeply. I'm going to stay at the hotel, and the number of suitcases in the lobby for this past residency. We were there with the 2021s this past weekend for class visits, and the number of suitcases in the lobby certainly led me to believe that there are a ton of people using the hotel, which again, really, I think underscores the sense of community in the program, the fact that people value the relationships with their classmates. They're carving out that time and the space to be fully present for those weekends.
Yeah, I think on Friday, the first residency, people were getting in Ubers and heading home to pack a suitcase to come back.
Yeah, so we're trying to get that message out a little bit earlier so you don't find yourself scrambling on that first weekend. And I think that's a great question because it also gives us a chance to talk a little bit about the community here. And it also gives us a chance maybe to talk a little bit about those students who are traveling in for the program. So students ask all the time, how many students are from, say, D.C., Maryland, Virginia? How many students are traveling in? It's roughly 2/3 of the class is from D.C., Maryland, Virginia. A third of the students are traveling in from a greater distance away. Now, that could be everything from Philadelphia. I was just there this past week. Always great to be in Philly. Could be New York. Could be Texas. Could be, the far west. We've got students in San Francisco and other points on the West Coast. It could also be an international location. I'm thinking about our 2021 student who comes from Indonesia. So the third who are traveling, it could be a train ride. It could be a couple flights, depending on where they're coming from. So, Katherine, when you get these questions from folks about just sort of the logistics and doing the program as a traveler, I know you're getting ready to head to Boston pretty soon. I do some Executive MBA events up there. What do you say to students?
Well, first and foremost, the Darden location in the Washington, D.C. metro area is so convenient. We are very close to the Reagan Airport. It takes about a 10-minute drive. And we are about how many metro stops, Brett, from...
You're about 5.
About 5 metro stops from the train station. And so it's super easy to get to once you arrive in DC. And I have found that many students enjoy that commuting time to kind of transition into their academic mindset, to go over their cases that they're about to discuss, to review material, and to be ready when they arrive.
Very true. I think about our folks who come from New York on the train. It's about 3.5 hours to Union Station, and we are 25 minutes by metro from Union Station. Very easy. Red line to orange, blue, silver line if you are a metro nerd like myself and enjoy public transportation. But those students invariably would post up in the cafe car and get their cases out and sort of do a little bit of prep work. And, they kind of have that time to focus on school. They're away from work. They're obviously not quite to the residency yet. So it does give you an opportunity. Same can be said for folks from Philadelphia too. An easy train ride, about an hour and 50 minutes, but enough time for you to really focus. And one of the changes we made over the past couple years, that might seem subtle, but I've really enjoyed it, is the Friday start time. So we previously started Fridays at 10 a.m., which those mornings felt a little frenetic, because 10 a.m. in the Washington, D.C. metro area with the traffic and commuting can be a little crazy. But now we start Fridays at noon. In fact, the first thing is actually a meal. Starts at 11 a.m. It's a brunch, best of both worlds, breakfast and lunch together. And students filter in throughout the morning. We have people who come in quite early to do a little bit more work. We have people who sort of come for a learning team meeting. They might have a career meeting. We had some folks doing the experiential leadership lab this past Friday, and that's been fun to see students work through that, which we'll be talking about that on the podcast in the coming months. But it's turned Sands Family Grounds on those Fridays into this kind of real hive of activity where students are coming in and socializing and catching up because they have the space and time to do that. I also think about our travelers, though. Very easy to travel in on Friday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people choose to work a little bit in the morning, although that's not really recommended, but you have that flexibility to have your morning to spend it the way that you see best fit for what your goals are.
And we get all these questions from folks. Wanted to take this opportunity to take on some myths and misconceptions and just frequent questions people are asking. So another question people ask is about the sort of weekend residency schedule. So for those of you who are readers of the Discover Darden blog, stay tuned. In the next couple of weeks, we'll actually have a blog post providing a lot more detail about the weekend residency and how it works and what it looks like. But wanted to talk a little bit more about that schedule for those of you who are just starting to wrap your head around what it might mean from a time component to be in this program. So again, weekend residencies are on a once-a-month weekend residency schedule. And that is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Fridays start at noon, and class on Fridays really go to about 6 p.m. On Saturday classes, this is another reason why it might be worth staying in the hotel. Saturday classes start at 8 a.m. That's early start time. Saturday is the longest day, 8 to 5:30. And then Sunday classes typically will go from 8 a.m. again, another early start time, to 3 or so.
And even though classes are ending on Friday at 6 and Saturday at 5:30, it doesn't mean your activities are ending for the day.
Indeed. We talked on the blog about Friday Night Live. It's a speaker series where you get to hear from senior leaders and executives. It's sort of informal, casual, fireside chat style. This is a new addition to the Executive MBA social calendar. It's been fun to be around for these conversations. So it's been everything from Dick Raines, who is CEO of Carfax, to most recently we had the editor of Politico, Carrie Budoff Brown, spoke with students. That was a really fascinating discussion about leading with empathy and humanity and sort of a human-centered workforce, and how she was really, trying to make Politico a great place for people to work and sort of leading cultural change in the newsroom. Fantastic. And that conversation was moderated by two of our current students who work at Politico, a 2020 and a 2021. They did a fantastic job. So, Friday nights are typically for those kind of speaker events. Saturdays, maybe a little bit more social. It could be dinner on your own or with your classmates, typically, or it could be a class-wide social event. So, recently went bowling, which is fun. They've also had some class-wide dinners. So you get to explore the DC area a little bit, which has no shortage of great restaurants. So, and then Sunday, you wrap up around 3, which leaves you plenty of time to travel home. I think, from a class standpoint, if you're curious, typically have 4 classes on Friday, 5 classes on Saturday, 4 classes on Sunday. And those are class sessions when we say classes. So, it could be a finance class and then an accounting class and then a leadership communication class and then an accounting class and then some other configuration on Saturday. You have breaks. I think it's well documented here on the podcast that the snacks are a highlight at Sands Family Grounds. And then you also will have meals. So most meals, so you typically have breakfast, lunch. Dinner could be part of a class-wide event, or it could be dinner on your own.
Right. So, I recommend the gummy bears. Those are my favorite snacks that we offer.
Yeah, it's close call between the gummy bears and the Swedish fish. But they both have their devotees. But you will not go hungry in this program. I think that's something that visitors are constantly impressed by. And I will say, if you are at a point where you're really thinking, Darden, it's starting to sound like the program for me, we'd recommend that you come for a class visit. I think there's a lot of value in the class visit. Not only do you get exposure to the case method and what that looks like, helps you have a baseline from program to program. You're going to be in class in every single program you're considering. So a class visit allows you to kind of do an apples to apples comparison. I also think class is a great way of sort of encountering the culture of the program. Look around the room. How do students engage with each other? Do they seem to know each other? Do they seem to enjoy the classroom dynamic? Do faculty seem engaged? What's the learning? It's a teaching style. What's the learning environment? And hopefully you'll be able to stick around for lunch or at least socialize with our students during the break afterwards. Great opportunity to make some personal connections. Students are always happy to share with you their experience. Combined with, there's a material benefit this year, Katherine. We are offering an application fee waiver.
That's right. $250 application fee waiver for showing up and sitting in one of the classes. And I think one of the things students are most surprised about when they come to visit a class is how engaged they immediately are, even though they're not technically in the class. These, as Brett mentioned, these are cases and they're conversations and dialogues. And so students sharing with each other their own perspectives, and prospective students undoubtedly will have their own perspective based on their own life experience. And so, find themselves wanting to participate, even though as visitors, we ask them not to.
That is hard. But the application fee waiver, we decided to do that this year because we felt very strongly about the impact of a class visit. I think it's an easy way for you in a couple hours to get a lot of information about the program and to confirm your interest in the program. I think it's super informative. And so we decided to put this sort of fee waiver, out there for people so that to really incentivize the choice of coming for a class visit. And so the Executive MBA application fee waiver, that saves you $250 $100. And for those people thinking about traveling for the program, part of the idea was also, if you were going to be traveling for your class visit, in some ways the fee waiver would offset your travel cost, right? So the cost of a flight, the cost of a train ticket down to DC, perhaps, you spend that money traveling rather than on your application fee, to our Executive MBA program. That was also part of the goal because, we are seeking to build a class with, that's as diverse and with as many different kinds of people as possible. We think about this in a lot of different ways, very broadly, certainly gender diversity, racial, ethnic diversity, industry diversity, geographic diversity. And so on the geographic diversity point in particular, we wanted to make it perhaps a little bit more enticing for people to consider traveling in for these class visits. And so not only do you get a sort of high impact visit, you also get a little bit of a material benefit. So that brings me to another popular question on our phone calls and in-person meetings. For those of you who are wondering where all these questions are coming from, Katherine and I have pretty regular phone calls with prospective students. You can schedule a conversation on our website very easily. It's right there on the homepage. In addition, we offer in-person meetings, what we call office hours. Katherine also does small group conversations called coffee chats. So lots of different ways to connect with us. But one of the, I think, more common questions is, am I the right person for this program? Do I have the right background? Am I who you're looking for? Where do you start with that question?
Right. So I start by explaining a little bit of the culture of our program and that we are learning through the case method. And so it is really important in the admissions office to be filling the class with people who represent a broad range of perspectives. So there is no one particular industry that we're looking for. There's no particular job function. We do need to see a minimum of 5 years of work experience. But beyond that, it's more about the story you're telling. What have you done? What have you learned about yourself? How are you growing as a leader? And where do you want to go? Why this program? Why is this program going to help you achieve your goals? And that story is different for everyone. But what we want to see is that someone has the initiative to pursue a program like this, has the leadership skills and the desire to invest in themselves and in their career.
And there, obviously there's all sorts of points where we get to know people along the way. I think one of the reasons why we encourage people to schedule a conversation, come to events, and come to a class visit, it not only gives you a deeper understanding of why you're interested in our program, it will also give you a deeper understanding of your own motivations and why you want to do this particular thing, and why you want to pursue an MBA, and why Darden makes a lot of sense for you. Because you will have conversations with people all along the way, whether they are fellow prospective students, whether they're current students, alumni, admissions officers like ourselves, and that will sharpen and deepen your understanding of your motivations here, and will also allow you to continually check in with your sort of thinking. Is this something I want to continue pursuing? We talk a lot about sort of just taking small steps. I think people tend to think about the decision to get an MBA as this really big thing, and the reality is, from an admissions standpoint, we just encourage people to take small steps. Schedule a conversation, talk to somebody, get a little bit more information, check in. Am I still interested? Is this still something that seems compelling to me? If so, come to an event. We do offer a number of events, some of them small, some of them large scale. Come to a class visit. Check back in. Am I still interested? Maybe then you follow up with the students you met at the class visit and do a little networking, both your own personal network or reach out to some Darden alums. We can help with that introduction. If you want to connect with some alumni from our program, current students from our program, after those conversations, check back in. And then maybe get to the point of where you're thinking about applying. But again, an application is just a step in the process. Katherine, I'm always struck that people tend to think that application is like a really, really final thing, whereas we tend to think that students are still very much in the evaluative mode. And that is not just about Darden. That may also be about pursuing an MBA as well.
Yeah, and to that point, there are pieces of the application that even will trickle in after that application deadline. So people will apply. They haven't taken their standardized test score yet. They may still be waiting on a letter of recommendation, but we still encourage them to kind of move forward in the process by submitting.
Yeah. And so we do a bunch of app tips webinars. For those of you who are wondering how our application process works, we do an app tips webinar around the deadlines for our admission cycle. So the next one's upcoming in early March. If you want to learn a little bit more about our process generally, great place to start. But our goal is, we try to be applicant centric. We try to be helpful, try to reach out. We don't want you to ever wonder, is there someone who can answer this question for me? We want you to feel like you have these resources close at hand. And so again, an application is just another step in that process. I think that was one of the messages that came through pretty clearly in that women's panel that we had last week, something that the current students and alumni were talking about. And I thought that was a great point.
Yeah. And Brett and I, we are people. We enjoy getting to know people. We enjoy hearing your stories. We enjoy helping you think through the decision on whether or not to pursue an MBA. So because you're signing up to get to know us, you're not committing to the program yet. It can take some time before you to make your final decision on whether or not it's the best step for you. And
I think people are always surprised. So we ran a blog on Discover Darden earlier this year where a student said, this is one of our students said, I really thought about this for potentially 11 years before I actually decided to pursue the degree. Now, 11 years is certainly, if you're thinking about a standard distribution, it's probably on the upper end of that curve. But we find that many students will think about this for a couple years, 2-3 years, something like that. So if you are in that consideration process and you've been thinking about an MBA for a while and wondering, hey, is this, have I been thinking about this for too long? Know that 2 or 3 years is kind of the norm. Now, there are plenty of people who come along and they know that they want to pursue this degree and they made their decision about it and they're ready to move very quickly. It seems like we encounter people who think about this for a while and then people who think about it for a couple months and they're ready to go. So that's, if you fall somewhere in between, that's great too. But to underscore Katherine's point, we are here to help. Now, the other common question that we get about, am I the right person, is around GPA and standardized tests. So we do have a standardized test requirement. A little bit of application process conversation here. We do have a standardized test requirement. We accept a number of standardized tests. We accept the executive assessment, GMAT, GRE, LSAT, and MCAT for those folks who may have pursued a law or may have considered a law degree or medical school at some point. I would say, we don't have a test preference, but we do encourage people to consider the executive assessment, or at least do a little bit of research about it. This is, in contrast to all of those other tests, the EA was designed with this population in mind. The beta group of schools that worked with the Graduate Management Admission Council on the development of the EA, they were all top Executive MBA programs. Darden was the 7th school globally to accept the test. We have 3+ years of experience with the test. It is easily the most popular test amongst our applicant pool. Well over half of our applicants last year took the EA. So a surging popularity, I should say. And part of that is it's a 40-question, 90-minute test that students study for about, roughly 20 hours for. Katherine, if you compare that to the GMAT or GRE, a little bit different for those tests.
The GMAT or GRE, they recommend about 120 hours to prepare for those exams. And Brett, you've taken the test, so you know better than I do. But my understanding is that the executive assessment is more of a readiness test, whereas the GMAT will be going back to high school geometry.
Yeah, it's a test of readiness versus those tests which are typically more test of aptitude. And the way the test was designed was GMAC wanted to help give Executive MBA applicants a sense of, am I ready to take this step? One of the values of taking a test, we know that people look at our program. We obviously have the standardized test requirement. We do have a few instances in which we will waive our standardized test requirement. I'll talk about those shortly. But one of the values of taking a test, it's another opportunity for you to check in with this idea of going back to school. What will school look like for me? How do I find time to prepare for something? This is not, what's on this test is not related to your job per se, right? You're having to learn perhaps something new or at least refresh some things. So, many people have taken professional certifications or tests that are related to their job, but it's been a while since they've had to sit down and study something that's sort of beyond their professional purview. And it can also help the other people in your life begin to understand what it might mean for you to be in school. So you have to carve out a couple of hours on a Saturday or on a Sunday and not not be as available on these weekends or weeknights as you're trying to prepare for this test. And if you're having a hard time finding time for, EA prep or GMAT or GRE prep, it's worth asking yourself the question of whether you would be able to find time for an MBA program. Our students report spending on average 15 to 20 hours per week on school. Now, that number can be less in some weeks, more in other weeks. That is an average. But no doubt that, as we talked about on the podcast many times, the program does require time commitment during the week and oftentimes on the weekends as people do their work. And so, keep that in mind that the standardized test, beyond just a test of readiness, is also an opportunity for you to test drive or at least engage with the idea of going back to school and some of the time management aspects of it. So we do have, as I mentioned, instances in which we waive our standardized test. Typically, we will waive if someone has a professional certification in a quantitative or technical discipline. So that would be something like a CPA, CFA, most commonly, or master's or advanced degree in a quantitative or technical discipline. Common things that we see, I certainly see a fair amount of computer science, engineering, law, medicine. So, as we say, no harm in submitting a standardized test waiver request. I typically get a response in 2 to 3 days. We work with a small group of people to sort of review those, so it doesn't take us too long to turn them around. And obviously, if you need clarity on whether you need to take a standardized test to apply to our Executive MBA program, good place to start. And again, no harm in submitting the waiver request. So, Katherine, people oftentimes ask, what about my GPA? Is it too low? What about my standardized test score? Is it where Darden would like to see it? How do you answer these questions?
Right. So I feel like sometimes people have an impression that there's one thing that can make or break an application. And our applications are really evaluated with a holistic review in mind. And we are obviously an academic program. So we are looking to see evidence that you will be able to succeed in our program academically. But we can learn about that from a variety of different ways. So obviously we will look at your undergraduate transcript. If we're not seeing strong evidence of academic performance there, we'll look at a standardized test score. We'll look at graduate school and degrees. We'll look at your professional work experience and your responsibilities, the things you've accomplished there, and trying to figure out what you're going to add to the classroom and do you have the academic potential to succeed in the class. One thing that we talk a lot about is how people are not necessarily the same student as a 32-year-old as they were as a 22-year-old. And so how has someone's record shifted as they've increased in age and maturity? Yeah, so we're trying to get a sense of who you are right now, matriculating in the program, what you will bring to that conversation, both sort of on the smaller level. Get a lot of questions about sort of groups in the Executive MBA. I mean, most students are using a learning team or two to help manage the workload. There's, group breakouts in many of our classes. I'm thinking about the leadership communication and accounting classes that were taking place this past weekend. Lots of groups of students. So we're thinking about who you're going to be. We're working on that sort of smaller scale with your classmates, as well as what kind of perspective you're going to bring to the classroom. We do not have a minimum required GPA. We do not have a minimum required test score. People are always wondering, what will you typically see for some of these standardized tests? For the executive assessment in our matriculated class, we have students with test scores from the 140s to the high 160s. Our average test score, EA score, has been for the past couple of years 153, but as our test score range suggests to you, we don't have a minimum. So that's just one example, but just underscore the fact that it is a holistic process, and we are really trying to get a sense of not just who you are in terms of your past academic accomplishments, but who you'll be in this program. And there's a lot about this from an admissions committee standpoint that is about sort of culture and ultimately what you'll bring to the community here, both during your time and certainly after graduation. So Katherine, another common question that we get, and I want to sort of wrap up with this one, but I would say that this is a pretty popular topic as we talk to people who are in this sort of in-between category, right? So maybe someone with 6, 7, 8 years of work experience, they like what they're doing, and they're thinking about a full-time program.
versus an executive MBA program. Great thing here at the Darden School of Business, you got great options either way you go. We have 3 formats of one MBA. We have our full-time MBA format, which is obviously based here in Charlottesville, and we have our 2 executive MBA formats, our Executive MBA, Global Executive MBA. These are part of one program, the Executive MBA and Global Executive MBA formats. If you come to Roslyn for a weekend residency, you'll meet both kinds of students. These formats are more similar than they ever have been. Really, the only difference between EMBA and GEMBA is the number of global residencies required. If you followed our recent global updates, check out our blog for more details. But the schedule is very, very similar. Core curriculum, identical. The global residency component is the only difference between these 2 formats. EMBA format students are required to do 1 week-long global residency. Global Executive MBA format students are required to do 4 week-long global residencies. EMBA students do have a little bit more flexibility to add additional global residencies for an additional charge. But all that's to say, you have great options here at the Darden School. So, Katherine, you're talking to somebody on the phone. They say, I'm thinking about full-time, but I'm also thinking about exec. How do you think about the trade-offs?
Right. Well, the first thing I would encourage someone like that to do is obviously to visit a class in the executive format and in the full-time format and interact with students in both classes to try to get a better sense of their cultural fit. I think that the students that I see who are leaning toward the executive format are students who are not interested in taking a step out of the workforce for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because they're really happy at their organization. They see an upward trajectory that they are on. They want to stay on. They feel like taking a step out of the workforce is going to set them backwards. And so they are looking to stay where they are, continue growing where they are while gaining the degree and some new tools and a new network in the process. When I look at students who are leaning toward a full-time MBA program, it is typically students with a little bit less experience, not always, and students who are really wanting to take a step out of the workforce, to go spend 2 years learning in an academic setting, have a summer to spend exploring through an internship, and who are looking for an immersive, all-school, lots of clubs and activities type of experience. So the trade-off is, the biggest one is obviously going to be, are you going to continue working or are you going to take time out to work? And then you might be moving your family to a new city and location versus keeping them all planted where they are. There are a lot of different ones. What's your take?
I think your point about a class visit is a really well put, because, sort of a lot of this is about the visualization aspect of it. So you go and sit in a class and sort of look around and you listen to the discussion and sort of think about, can I contribute here? But can I also gain something from this conversation? What will I learn? Who is my peer group here? So that's where we are thinking about that classroom dynamic a lot. I think about the work experience range of our full-time MBA program is typically 1 to 10 years. Average work experience is typically around 4 to 5 years. With our executive MBA program, there's a broader distribution. We have a work experience minimum of 5 years, as you mentioned. Average years of work experience around 12. And the upper end of our class is typically 20, 25 plus years of work experience. But the 12 years of work experience, in some ways, I don't think that tells the full story of the class. I think it's much more important to focus on that range, because when you walk in the executive MBA classroom, you'll find a lot of people in their late 20s to early to mid 30s. And so I think that's why a class visit is super important. I do think the internship is a big part of it. As we mentioned, earlier in this podcast, it's not necessarily about your career goal. You can switch jobs out of our executive MBA program. I think it is a question of sort of mechanism. Do you need an internship to actually make your desired career transition? That's probably one of the bigger questions. I think your point about experience is also well taken. I think we have a very strong culture in the executive MBA, but school is not going to be a sort of all-consuming focus of your life. Both socially, academically. We do have clubs and organizations in the executive MBA, but the reality is students are juggling many things in addition to school as an executive format student. The other thing that I hear a lot of Executive MBA students talk about is sort of career momentum. They felt like they were at a point where that taking 2 years off ultimately might have been more costly to them in their desired career progression than just to continue working. And then I think for some students, there's also a financial component to this. So as you think about sort of, overall, business school decision, I think some people, given where they were, life, family, personally, they couldn't forego a salary for 2 years. Ultimately, that did not make financial sense for them. Every student's going to think about this differently. You notice, if you're listening closely here, that we use the word trade-offs, not pros and cons. I think that's very important as you think through this. There is no bad decision here. This is actually one of these things that if you focus on what you want out of this program, you will find the right path. So, Katherine, here we are at the end of the podcast. I want to start where we began. It's a great time to apply. We have a number of upcoming deadlines. We still have scholarship money available. We have a lot of events upcoming. We have class visits in March and April. Check out our event calendar. One of my favorite things here on the podcast is ask people for advice or tips. What's your one admissions tip or piece of advice for people who are listening to this podcast right now and thinking about an Executive MBA?
One piece of advice. My one piece of advice would be to take every opportunity to get to know more about our program by attending webinars, visiting class, reaching out to our current students and alumni. As you begin to do these things, I think you will become more and more aware as to whether or not this is something that's giving you a lot of energy and excitement, or if this just doesn't feel like the smart move for you at this point in your career.
Yeah, and to sort of second that, before we get to my piece of advice, would just say that from an admission standpoint, we kind of view our jobs more as sort of counselors, sounding boards. I don't know how we might best describe this, but this is not a sales role. Our goal is to help you make the best decision for you and to have the information that you need as you evaluate your options here. So we are here as a resource, happy to make introductions, help you along this way. We've been working with this population now for a number of years. We've met a lot of students. We've heard their stories. We've met a lot of prospective students. And so I think we have that opportunity to sort of help you think through that in sort of unique ways. The other sort of advice that I would offer is, I'm a big fan of the executive assessment. Again, it's not a preference so much as I think that there is a gap here. People tend to think they have to take a GMAT or GRE, to apply to an executive MBA program. The reality is that many top executive MBA programs, they will accept the executive assessment. We are obviously included in that number. Big fans of the test. Take some time, learn about that test, because standardized test tends to be one of those barriers that people really fixate on. We actually have a webinar upcoming on the 19th. Eric Chambers, I should say the 19th of February, Eric Chambers of GMAC will be back here to talk about the EA. Just want to plug that again because I do think that test is super helpful to people. The feedback that we've gotten from prospective students who've taken it, applicants, current students who've taken it, is that it felt like the right test for where they are in their career. So just want to put in another plug for the executive assessment.
Great advice.
So, Katherine, I think we pretty much covered it all. This might be a record podcast episode in terms of length, but, talk about news you can use. We pretty much plowed through every question that we frequently get from people. So, whether it's FAQs on the website or just this podcast, it's been I think, a helpful podcast.
I hope so. I really do.
All right. Well, thank you for making the time, Katherine, and have a great day.
You too, Brett.
And that was our Mailbag show here on the ExecMBA podcast with my admissions colleague, Katherine Alford. As previously noted, as always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, you got questions, we've got answers, you can reach us at that's ExecMBA at Darden.Virginia.edu. And until next time, thanks for listening.